The first time my mother told people I was jealous of my sister. I was 12 years old and standing in our kitchen holding a broken birthday gift that technically belonged to me. My younger sister Lily had smashed it during an argument because she got angry. I would not let her use it first. I remember crying while trying to tape the pieces back together at the table, while my mother stood behind us explaining to my aunt that I had always struggled with jealousy issues where Lily was concerned. That sentence followed me for the next 15 years of my life. Every accomplishment became jealousy. Every argument became jealousy. Every boundary became jealousy. If I complained about Lily borrowing my clothes without asking, my mother said I was insecure because Lily was prettier. If I got upset after Lily flirted with my boyfriend at a graduation party, my mother accused me of competing with her unnecessarily. Eventually, relatives started treating me carefully at family events, like I was emotionally unstable whenever Lily entered the room. The worst part was that Lily loved it. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, hidden secrets, and the moment a single DNA test destroys years of lies, subscribe, because my mother spent decades convincing everyone I hated my sister out of jealousy, until one hospital visit exposed the truth she should have taken to her grave. Growing up, Lily was the center of everything inside our family. She was louder, prettier, more outgoing, and naturally good at making people feel drawn toward her. Teachers loved her. Relatives spoiled her. My mother practically treated her like proof she succeeded at life. Meanwhile, I became the difficult daughter somehow. Not because I caused problems, because I noticed them. That difference matters in families like mine. Lily lied constantly growing up, but she lied beautifully. She cried easily, apologized dramatically, and somehow always found a way becoming the victim by the end of every situation. Meanwhile, I was quieter and more direct, which made me sound cold whenever arguments happened. My father used to joke that Lily got her emotions from our mother, while I inherited his personality instead. At the time, that seemed harmless. Years later, those words became much harder to ignore. One of my earliest memories of feeling different happened when I was around 8 years old. My father took Lily and me to a county fair while my mother stayed home sick. I remember standing beside him while we waited for Lily to finish a ride when an older couple nearby started making conversation. The woman smiled at Lily and immediately said she looked exactly like our father. Then she looked at me. I still remember the awkward pause afterward. Finally, she laughed softly and said maybe I took after my mother's side more. At the time, it meant nothing. But moments like that happened constantly growing up. Relatives joked that Lily got the family looks, while I somehow ended up completely different. Family friends occasionally asked whether we were half-sisters, because our features looked nothing alike. Lily had dark hair, olive skin, and sharp green eyes exactly like my father. I was pale, blonde, and looked nothing like either parent, honestly. Whenever anyone mentioned it, my mother became strangely defensive. She always blamed genetics being unpredictable. Then she changed the subject quickly. As I got older, the differences between how my mother treated us became impossible ignoring. Lily got patience, softness, excuses, and endless emotional protection. I got criticism disguised as honesty. If Lily forgot responsibilities, my mother said she was overwhelmed. If I made mistakes, my mother acted embarrassed by me personally. My father noticed it too sometimes. A few times during high school, he defended me during arguments and asked my mother privately why she treated me harsher than Lily. Every single time, the conversation somehow turned into accusations that I manipulated him emotionally against the family. Then my mother would start crying. And somehow, everyone ended up comforting her instead. That pattern defined my entire childhood. By college, I stopped expecting fairness entirely. I worked 2 jobs, paid most of my own expenses, and stayed away from home as much as possible because every visit turned emotionally exhausting eventually. Lily still lived at home while changing majors repeatedly and posting glamorous pictures online pretending her life was perfect. My mother adored every second of it. Then came the engagement party. That was the night everything finally broke beyond repair. I was 27 and engaged to a man named Daniel who worked in commercial real estate. He was stable, calm, and honestly, one of the first people who ever made me feel emotionally safe. We had been together nearly 4 years when my parents offered hosting an engagement dinner for both families. At first, everything felt normal. Then I noticed Lily drinking heavily almost immediately. By dessert, she was openly flirting with Daniel in front of everyone. Not subtle flirting either. Touching his arm constantly. Sitting too close. Making jokes about how she met him first technically, because she introduced us years earlier. Everyone laughed awkwardly, while I sat there feeling humiliated in my own parents' dining room. Finally, I pulled Lily aside privately and told her to stop. That should have been a normal boundary. Instead, she started crying almost instantly. Within minutes, my mother rushed into the hallway asking what happened. Before I could even explain, Lily tearfully claimed I accused her of trying to steal Daniel because I was insecure and jealous again. Again. That word made my stomach drop immediately, because suddenly, I realized nothing inside this family would ever change. No matter what Lily did, my mother would always rewrite reality around protecting her. And she did exactly that. In front of Daniel's parents, my relatives, and everyone else at the dinner, my mother announced that I had struggled with jealousy toward Lily since childhood and sometimes created problems whenever attention shifted away from me emotionally. I remember the silence afterward more than anything. Not because people believed her completely, because some of them clearly did. That was the moment I finally stopped feeling angry and started feeling tired instead. Daniel defended me that night, but the damage still lingered afterward. Not because he doubted me, but because suddenly I realized my own family spent years quietly destroying my reputation behind my back whenever conflict involved Lily. And once I noticed it, I could not stop noticing it anymore. After the engagement dinner, I stopped visiting home for almost 2 months. Not because anyone apologized, because nobody did. My mother acted like the entire situation was my fault for embarrassing Lily publicly, while Lily kept posting vague emotional quotes online about toxic people projecting insecurities onto others. Several relatives suddenly became colder toward me too, and I could tell my mother had already started retelling the story privately in a version where I ruined the evening because I could not handle Lily getting attention. Daniel tried supporting me through all of it, but even he admitted the dynamic inside my family felt strange. He once asked me a question while we were driving home from dinner with his parents that honestly stayed in my head for years afterward. He asked why my mother seemed personally offended whenever anyone defended me instead of Lily. At the time, I did not know how to answer. Then my father got sick. Everything changed after that. It started with exhaustion and stomach pain that kept getting worse over several months. At first, doctors thought it was stress-related because my father worked long hours and ignored his health constantly. But eventually, testing revealed liver damage severe enough that he needed immediate treatment. For the first time in years, the family stopped revolving around Lily completely, and she hated it. While my mother spent most of her time at the hospital, Lily complained constantly about feeling emotionally neglected. She posted crying selfies online about how hard the situation was for her, while rarely visiting my father longer than 20 minutes at a time. Meanwhile, I practically moved into the hospital. I handled insurance paperwork, medication schedules, specialist appointments, and financial records because my mother became emotionally useless whenever things got serious. Daniel helped constantly too. He drove me to appointments, brought food to the hospital, and quietly handled things without making everything about himself the way Lily always did. That period forced my father and me closer than we had been in years. One night around 2 in the morning, while my mother went home to sleep and Lily claimed hospitals gave her anxiety attacks, my father looked at me from his hospital bed and asked a question completely out of nowhere. He asked whether I ever felt different growing up. I remember laughing softly because the question felt absurdly obvious. I told him of course I did. Then he asked something stranger. He asked whether my mother ever treated me like I belonged fully inside the family. That question unsettled me immediately because there was something heavy underneath the way he said it. I asked him what he meant. Instead of answering directly, he just stared at the television for several seconds before quietly saying he should have paid attention sooner. That sentence stayed in my head for weeks. Then things became much worse medically. One of my father's specialists recommended immediate family DNA testing to evaluate transplant compatibility options because his condition was progressing faster than expected. The doctor explained relatives often provided the best donor matches, especially siblings or children. At first, nobody thought much about it. It was just medical testing. Routine. Necessary. Lily complained dramatically about needles before finally agreeing after my mother pressured her into cooperating. I completed the testing the same afternoon because honestly, if donating part of my liver could save my father's life, I would have done it without hesitation. Then we waited. The results came back 2 weeks later. I still remember the exact moment everything exploded because it happened inside one of those tiny hospital consultation rooms with bad fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable chairs. Nobody ever notices until life changes inside them. The doctor walked in looking confused before he even sat down. At first, I assumed the compatibility results were bad. Then he looked directly at my father and asked whether there had ever been any possibility of non-paternity inside the family because one set of results did not align genetically the way expected. The room went completely silent. My mother's face lost color immediately. My father looked confused. Lily looked irritated more than concerned because she still did not understand what the doctor was actually saying yet. Then the doctor explained carefully that based on the DNA analysis, I could not biologically be my father's daughter. I honestly think my brain stopped processing sound for several seconds after that. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then my mother suddenly stood up so fast her chair slammed backward into the wall. And that was the moment I knew. Not suspected. Knew. Because innocent people react shocked. My mother reacted terrified. My father kept staring at the paperwork, like he physically could not understand what he was reading. Meanwhile, Lily slowly started crying because suddenly the entire family dynamic underneath our lives no longer felt stable anymore. Then my father asked the question that destroyed everything. He asked my mother if the results were wrong. My mother did not answer immediately. And honestly, that silence said more than anything she eventually admitted afterward. Nobody spoke for several seconds after my father asked whether the results were wrong. My mother just stood there beside the wall, gripping the back of the chair, so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The doctor looked deeply uncomfortable and quietly explained that false results were extremely unlikely because the testing had already been repeated automatically after the first inconsistency appeared. Then my father asked the question again. This time his voice sounded different. Calmer, which honestly made it worse. He asked my mother whether there was any possibility I was not biologically his daughter. My mother started crying immediately. That was it. That was the answer. I remember staring at her while this horrible cold feeling spread through my chest because suddenly dozens of moments from my childhood started rearranging themselves inside my head. The favoritism, the distance, the criticism, the way she always defended Lily, no matter what happened. Then my father looked at me. I will never forget that expression for the rest of my life because it was not anger first. It was heartbreak. Not because I was not biologically his. Because somewhere deep down, he already suspected it. My mother kept trying to speak through tears, but nothing coherent came out at first. Finally, after several minutes of silence and crying, she admitted she had an affair shortly before getting pregnant with me. The room felt physically smaller after that. My father just leaned back in the chair, staring at the floor, while Lily cried beside my mother. Meanwhile, I sat there completely numb because the worst part was not even the affair itself. It was realizing my mother spent my entire life punishing me for it. Then my father asked the obvious question. He asked whether Lily was biologically his. The doctor quietly confirmed yes. That detail somehow made everything even uglier emotionally, because suddenly, the family dynamic finally made sense completely. Lily was not just the favorite daughter. She was the real daughter in my mother's eyes. And I think my mother hated herself enough for the affair that she spent years projecting that resentment onto me instead. Then came the part that truly destroyed the family. My father asked whether he knew the man my mother cheated with. My mother started crying harder immediately. That was when I realized the truth was even worse than I imagined. Apparently, the affair happened with one of my father's closest friends at the time, a man named Victor, who used to visit our house constantly during the early years of my parents' marriage. According to my mother, the affair only lasted a few months and ended before she discovered she was pregnant. Then she dropped another bomb. Victor died in a car accident before I was born, which meant my father spent 28 years raising another man's child while believing she was biologically his, and the only person who knew the truth the entire time was my mother. I honestly thought my father might collapse right there inside the hospital room. He just sat there staring into space while my mother begged him to say something. Lily kept crying too, but even through my shock, I noticed something ugly underneath it. Fear, because suddenly, the entire emotional structure of our family looked horrible from the outside. Then my father quietly asked my mother one final question. He asked whether that was why she treated me differently growing up. The silence afterward felt endless. My mother tried denying it at first. She claimed she loved both daughters equally and blamed stress, personality differences, and family misunderstandings. But nobody in that room believed her anymore. Not after years of obvious favoritism, everybody ignored, because acknowledging it would have forced uncomfortable questions. Then my father said something that permanently changed the way I viewed him. He looked directly at me and apologized. Not for the DNA results, for failing to protect me from her. That broke me harder than the affair itself. Because deep down, I think part of me spent my entire life wanting somebody in the family to finally admit I was never imagining the difference in treatment. And there it was. Out loud. Real. The hospital became chaos after that. My father refused speaking to my mother for 2 days. Lily kept trying contacting me, but honestly, I could barely process my own thoughts by then. Relatives started hearing fragments of the story almost immediately because hospitals are terrible places for secrets. Within a week, half the extended family knew DNA testing exposed the affair. Then something strange started happening. People started treating me differently. Aunts who spent years acting distant suddenly wanted talking privately. Cousins started mentioning memories where my mother clearly favored Lily while everyone else ignored it. Even relatives who used to believe I was jealous began admitting the situation looked very different now. That part honestly made me angry too, because it meant people noticed the unfairness long before the DNA results. They just found it easier blaming me than questioning my mother. Then Lily came to my apartment unexpectedly one night. At first, I almost did not let her inside. But when I opened the door, she looked nothing like the confident golden child I grew up with. She looked exhausted, swollen-eyed, and genuinely shaken. And for the first time in our lives, neither of us knew who we were supposed to be anymore. Lily stood outside my apartment holding a paper grocery bag, like she forgot why she brought it there in the first place. For almost a minute, neither of us said anything. Growing up, Lily always knew exactly how to control a room emotionally. She cried at the right moments, smiled at the right moments, and somehow managed turning every situation in her favor eventually. But standing in my doorway that night, she looked completely lost. I finally moved aside and let her in. She sat on my couch quietly while I made coffee mostly, because I needed something to do with my hands. The silence between us felt strange because for the first time in our lives, there was no performance happening. No mother stepping in to protect her. No relatives watching. No family narrative explaining why I was the difficult sister and she was the lovable one. Then, Lily said something I genuinely did not expect. She admitted she always knew our mother treated us differently. Not fully why, but enough to notice it. According to her, even as kids, she sometimes felt uncomfortable with how quickly our mother defended her during arguments. She said there were moments growing up where she purposely blamed me for things, because she already knew who our mother would believe automatically. That honesty hurt more than denial would have. Then she started crying again and admitted something even worse. She told me our mother used to say strange things about me whenever I was not around. Not openly cruel things. Small comments, Comments about how difficult I was, how cold I seemed, or how I never looked at her with real love the way Lily supposedly did. Hearing that made my stomach turn, because suddenly I realized my mother spent years quietly building an emotional case against me inside the family. She shaped how relatives viewed me long before I was old enough defending myself properly. Then Lily looked at me and asked the question both of us were thinking. She asked whether I still considered her my sister. I honestly did not know how answering that question yet, because none of this was Lily's fault originally. She did not create the affair. She did not create the favoritism as children. But she absolutely benefited from it once she became old enough understanding what was happening. And deep down, I think she knew that too. Meanwhile, things between my parents completely collapsed. My father moved into a hotel temporarily after leaving the hospital because he refused staying in the same house as my mother. According to relatives, they spent nearly 3 decades building a marriage around a lie only one of them knew existed. Then another truth came out. My aunt called me a few days later and revealed something that honestly made the situation even uglier. Apparently, several relatives suspected something happened years ago because my mother became paranoid whenever people mentioned how different I looked from my father. There were whispers after I was born, especially because Victor and I apparently shared similar features according to older family friends. Nobody confronted it directly. Nobody wanted destroying the family. So instead, everybody ignored it and let me grow up inside a dynamic that never fully made emotional sense. That part made me furious. Not just at my mother. At everyone. Because adults saw enough warning signs to gossip privately, but still allowed me spending years believing something was fundamentally wrong with my personality instead. Then came the funeral-level disaster that truly destroyed my mother socially. One of my cousins uploaded an innocent family picture online from years earlier, showing my father holding Lily and me as children during a camping trip. The comments turned ugly fast. Once relatives connected the DNA story, already spreading privately through the family. People started comparing our faces publicly. Then someone mentioned Victor. Within days, half the extended family knew everything. My mother became the villain almost overnight. And honestly, part of me hated how satisfying that felt. For years, she controlled the narrative completely. She painted me as jealous, unstable, bitter, and emotionally difficult whenever conflict involved Lily. Now, suddenly, people were reevaluating every story they ever heard about me. Relatives started apologizing. Friends of the family started admitting they always thought my mother acted strangely toward me. Even Daniel's parents called privately and apologized for believing some of the engagement dinner drama originally. The most painful apology came from my grandmother, my father's mother. She cried the entire phone call. She admitted she noticed differences in treatment for years, but convinced herself she was imagining it because confronting the possibility felt too horrible emotionally. Then, she said something that completely broke me. She told me I spent my whole childhood trying to earn love that should have been given freely from the beginning. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Then my father asked, meeting me alone. We met at a small diner outside the city because apparently he could not handle being near the house yet. The second I saw him, he looked older somehow, smaller. But the moment he sat down, the first thing he said mattered more than anything else happening afterward. He told me I was still his daughter. No hesitation. No conditions. Just certainty. I started crying immediately because somewhere deep inside me, I think I feared losing the only parent who ever genuinely tried loving me consistently growing up. Then my father admitted something that honestly shattered me. He said part of him suspected the truth years ago. Not consciously, but emotionally. He could never fully explain why my mother treated me differently while defending Lily so intensely. According to him, there were moments throughout my childhood where he noticed my mother looking at me almost guiltily after arguments. But every time he questioned it, she manipulated the situation emotionally until he felt crazy for doubting her. Then he told me he filed for divorce that morning. And honestly, I felt nothing hearing it. Not shock, not sadness, just inevitability. Because some betrayals are too big surviving once the truth finally reaches daylight. The divorce became official 6 months later. My father never screamed at my mother through the process. That was the strange part. He just emotionally shut down completely after the DNA results. According to my aunt, my mother kept forcing dramatic conversations about forgiveness, healing, and saving the family, but my father stopped engaging entirely. I think the affair hurt him, but I think realizing she spent decades treating me differently because of it destroyed him even more. Meanwhile, my mother's reputation inside the family completely collapsed. For years, she controlled every narrative by turning herself into the emotional victim whenever conflict happened. But once the DNA results exposed the affair, people started revisiting old memories differently. Relatives remembered birthdays where Lily received expensive gifts while I got practical ones. They remembered how quickly my mother criticized me publicly while protecting Lily constantly. Suddenly, all those moments looked ugly instead of normal. The hardest part for my mother was that she could no longer blame me for any of it. The jealousy story completely died overnight because now everybody understood something important. I was never jealous of Lily. I was reacting to years of obvious favoritism while being told I imagined it. That difference changed everything. Lily struggled badly after the truth came out too, though not in the way I expected. Growing up, as the favorite shaped her entire personality more than either of us realized. Once our mother stopped controlling the family narrative successfully, Lily suddenly had to face how much of her identity depended on being protected constantly. People stopped automatically defending her. That hit her hard. A few months after my father moved out, Lily started therapy. To her credit, she became more honest during that period than she had ever been in our entire lives. One night during dinner at my apartment, she admitted she spent years competing with me without even understanding why. According to her, our mother constantly compared us privately growing up. She praised Lily for being softer, prettier, easier to love, and more emotionally connected to the family. At the same time, she described me as distant, difficult, and cold whenever Lily upset her. That explained so much. My mother built our relationship around comparison from the beginning because somewhere deep down, she needed Lily representing the perfect daughter, emotionally, while I became the reminder of the worst decision she ever made. Then Lily admitted something that honestly shocked me. She told me she used to intentionally flirt with my boyfriends because part of her liked proving she could take attention away from me whenever she wanted. Hearing that hurt. But strangely, it also made things clearer. Because for years, I kept trying understanding why my relationship with Lily always felt emotionally unstable underneath the surface. Now, I finally understood that our mother quietly trained both of us into roles neither of us created ourselves. The golden child and the unwanted reminder. Around that same time, Daniel proposed again. Not because we broke up earlier, but because the original engagement became buried under so much family chaos that everything surrounding it felt poisoned afterward. So one evening, he took me to the lake outside the city, where we had our third date years earlier, and asked me again properly, this time without my family involved. I said yes before he even finished talking. And honestly, that moment felt more peaceful than dramatic, because by then I was exhausted by emotionally complicated people. Daniel never needed attention, manipulation, or constant reassurance. He just loved me consistently, in a way that finally felt safe. My mother found out about the engagement through relatives. Then she called me crying. At first, I almost ignored the call entirely, but something made me answer anyway. She spent nearly 20 minutes apologizing. Real apologies this time, not emotional excuses disguised as apologies. She admitted she spent years resenting me because every time she looked at me, she remembered the affair and the guilt attached to it. According to her, loving Lily felt easier because Lily represented the version of her life that stayed intact. Then she said something that honestly explained my entire childhood in one sentence. She said she kept trying to convince herself I hated Lily because admitting the truth about her own behavior felt too unbearable. I listened quietly the entire time. Then I told her something she probably needed, hearing years earlier. I told her children always notice where love gets distributed unevenly, even when adults pretend otherwise. She started crying harder after that. For a long time, I hated my mother for everything. The favoritism, the lies, the way she destroyed my reputation inside the family whenever I defended myself. But eventually, the anger became exhausting. Because honestly, my mother already destroyed her own life more completely than I ever could have. She lost her marriage. She damaged both daughters permanently. She turned Lily into someone addicted to validation and competition. And she spent nearly 30 years punishing a child for adult choices that were never the child's fault to begin with. That realization changed the shape of my anger. Eventually, a year later, Daniel and I got married in a small ceremony near the lake with close friends and a few family members. My father walked me down the aisle. That mattered, not because of biology, because love is built through presence, protection, and choice over time. My father might not have shared my DNA, but he was still the person who taught me how to drive, helped me with homework, sat through dance recitals, and stayed awake during storms when I was scared as a kid. No DNA test could erase that. Lily attended the wedding too. Our relationship was still complicated, but for the first time in our lives, it felt honest. Not perfect, not magically healed, just honest. As for my mother, things never fully recovered between us. Some damage becomes part of the foundation, permanently. But she finally stopped telling people I was jealous of my sister. Because after the DNA results came out, everybody finally understood the truth. I was never fighting for attention. I was fighting to be treated like I belonged in my own family at all. If you made it this far, I genuinely want to know something. Do you think my mother actually loved me and just buried that love under guilt and resentment for years? Or do you think some parents emotionally separate themselves from a child once that child reminds them of a mistake they cannot forgive themselves for? And if you found out one DNA test explained your entire childhood, would it give you closure or make the betrayal feel even worse? Families like this exist more than people admit publicly. Sometimes one child becomes the golden child, while another becomes the emotional scapegoat. And everybody pretends it is personality instead of favoritism, until something finally exposes the truth underneath everything. If you have ever dealt with favoritism, hidden family secrets, or being blamed for reacting to unfair treatment, share your story in the comments. I read far more of them than people probably realize. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe because I post stories like this regularly. If you want to support the channel or help me keep making stories like these, you can always support through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the description and pinned comment.